Distinguished guests, good afternoon. Today we are officially starting the press conference of the Deputy President of the Government in charge of European Affairs, Marichikj, and the head of delegation of the EU to the Republic of North Macedonia, David Gear. At this press conference for the report of the European Commission for 2023, we will hear from the Ambassador Gear and the Deputy Prime Minister Marichikj. Afterwards, we will have questions from the media, 3+3. 3 for the Deputy Prime Minister Marichikj and 3 for the Ambassador. In the beginning, I would like to invite the head of delegation, Mr. Gear, to take the floor.
Vice Premier,
Distinguished Deputy Prime Minister, distinguished representatives of the media.
Very pleased to present the European Commission's enlargement package for 2023 as it concerns North Macedonia. And I'd like to focus on 2 key elements in this package: the country report, which assesses the progress that North Macedonia has made in the course of the past year on EU-related reforms, and secondly, a new proposal from the European Commission for a growth plan for the Western Balkans. Starting with the country report, a few preliminary remarks. The report aims to provide a clear and objective assessment of progress. It covers the period from the late autumn of 2022 to summer 2023. While it highlights some areas of progress, it is also very frank about those areas where there has not been progress or limited progress. Especially in those areas we consider to be so important that we describe them as the fundamentals in the accession negotiation process, such as the rule of law, the fight against corruption, public administration, reform, fundamental human rights. I think the report is frank but fair. And by doing so, we want to give encouragement to the authorities, the state institutions, all political actors to do more, much more, to advance on reform in the interests of citizens and in the interests of the EU's path to the European Union. A couple of words of context. The report comes in a context of considerable momentum on enlargement, and I've said this on many occasions. In recent years, particularly following Russia's illegal war on Ukraine, there is a clear understanding that enlargement is in our mutual interest. It is about prosperity and democracy, but also about stability and security. Yesterday's historic recommendations concerning the opening of accession negotiations for Ukraine and Moldova are yet more evidence of this. We want North Macedonia to benefit from this momentum. The report also comes in a context of opportunity, notably with the Commission's proposal for a growth plan for the Western Balkans, which I will brief a little bit more in a moment. We want North Macedonia to benefit from this opportunity. Now, turning to the substance of the report, it's very comprehensive. It runs to some 120 pages. I'm going to focus on a few key areas, starting with what we call the political criteria. The overall conclusion from the report within the political criteria is that North Macedonia continued its efforts to strengthen democracy while it faced significant challenges in the area of the rule of law. So what do we actually mean when we say that? First of all, the report expresses an overarching concern about political polarization, which impacted in particular on the work of Parliament, delaying much-needed reforms and important appointments. This includes the active blockage of Parliament. The European Union accession process has been said by many people, and I have repeated it many times, requires consensus between the political parties on key reforms. In the context of the Parliament, the report notes excessive and sometimes inappropriate use of the fast-track procedures. It recalls the basic principle that the EU flag should be used when directly linked to the adoption of laws whose main goal is to align with EU norms and standards and not to shortcut debates on important issues. It specifically recalls the misuse of the flag in the case of the criminal law amendments and the laws related to Road Corridors 8 and 10D. This was the Bechtel-Enka contract. And it notes that the use of the shortened procedure rose from 38% to 58%. Now, turning to some specific areas, the rule of law. The report notes that there was no progress. The report recalled the circumstances regarding the controversial dismissal of the former president of the Judicial Council and the lack of confidence among judges in this institution. As you know, a peer review mission was deployed by the European Union, by the European Commission, in consultation with the government. We look forward to its recommendations soon. The report recalls the recommendations from previous years which have not been implemented, including completing the implementation of the judicial strategy and a revision of the legislative framework governing the overall functioning of the Judicial Council. Of course, it covers other areas of the rule of law as well, not just the Judicial Council. On the fight against corruption, the report again reports no progress. Corruption remains prevalent in many areas and remains an issue of concern. The report notes that delays and reversals in trials of high-level corruption cases increased, resulting in the expiration of the statute of limitations in some cases. And it noted as a matter of serious concern that the changes to the criminal code reduced the maximum legal penalties for some cases of serious corruption, resulting in the application of the statute of limitations, halting or terminating a large number of such cases and hampering the authorities' ability to investigate and prosecute such cases in the future. The report commended the work of the State Commission for the Prevention of Corruption and the State Audit Office, but called for the recommendations of both to be followed up. On public administration reform, it concluded that there was limited progress. There is still a need after 5 years to adopt the revised legislative framework for human resources management. Now, I know there is work ongoing on this, but as yet the legislation has not been adopted. And this concerns important legislation on administrative servants, public sector employees, and top-level management. This is essential in ensuring merit-based appointments and in the fight against nepotism and cronyism. And in this regard, the recommendations of the State Commission for the Prevention of Corruption have still to be implemented. Another area which we include within this fundamentals cluster of the accession negotiations is fundamental rights. Conditions in prisons remain dire, notably Idrizovo, and there has been no follow-up to the recommendations of the European Committee for the Prevention of Torture. In the case of non-discrimination, the report calls for special efforts to promote non-discrimination, increase effectiveness in addressing hate crime and hate speech, strengthening the capacity and independence of institutions in charge of the protection of rights of persons belonging to minorities or communities, building on the good work that has already been done, including by allocating the necessary resources to the Commission for the Prevention and Protection Against Discrimination. The report also expressed serious concerns regarding the anti-gender campaigns, at times supported by local government officials, religious and political leaders, which took place last July. On freedom of expression, an issue which affects you all and all citizens, the general context remains conducive to media freedoms, and the report notes improvements such as the criminal code. But it's important that it's important that the legal framework should be amended to align with EU standards. Now, some progress was made last July in this regard. There are new proposals regarding the media legislative framework. It will be very important that those proposals are consistent with the EU laws and standards, what we call the acquis, and there are already concerns regarding the use of the EU flag in this context, or potential use. Of course, there are threats, as there are across the European Union as well, in the digital sphere, from disinformation, breaches of intellectual property rights, and a lack of transparency concerning paid political advertising. There is an important need for increased media literacy. And lastly, let me mention here, because it is an issue of great importance, it's important to promptly address all threats and acts of violence against journalists and to ensure that perpetrators are brought to justice. Now, I've touched on some of the key areas within the fundamentals. Of course, the report also covers areas where there has been progress. The steps to end statelessness are significant. The efforts to combat organized crime continue. The efforts in the management of migration continue, including now with Frontex. Some areas of the economic criteria, such as economic and monetary policy, labour and social policy, are more positive. And the country has an exemplary record in terms of the common foreign and security policy, showing its clear alignment with the European Union. I would also commend the extraordinary efforts, extraordinary work that has gone on during the screening process, as President von der Leyen in this same place made the same comments very recently, only a week ago. I started by saying that the country report should act as an encouragement or a spur to action, to seize the momentum and move decisively forward. The first cluster of issues which will be opened includes respective roadmaps which offer the means to address many of these issues. So this report should be read together with the screening reports, and that should form the basis of real action to address many of these issues. To take advantage of this, the country will need to fulfill its commitment to make the constitutional amendments agreed bilaterally with Bulgaria. Of course, this depends solely on North Macedonia. Finally, I'd like to say a few words about what I've described as an opportunity. During her visit to Skopje last week, President von der Leyen announced a growth plan for the Western Balkans. I would encourage you to look at this really carefully. This is a bold proposal, a game changer, and there's a lot more detail now available. What is the goal? It's quite simply to promote economic and social growth of the Western Balkans so that they can catch up with the European Union in advance of actually joining the European Union. And it would do so by providing access to parts of the EU's single market. And any of you that follow closely economics within the European Union as well as social convergence will know that the driver of growth is the EU's single market. This radically new proposal responds in part to demands from partners in the region. It's about rapidly growing the economy, increasing living standards, investments and job opportunities. And it consists of 4 elements. As I've said, first of all, access to parts of the EU single market, the driver of growth in the EU, ahead of actual accession. So you don't need to wait to the day that you join to go through this process. It's now and in advance. Secondly, it relies upon promoting regional integration on the basis of EU standards and laws. That means integration among the Western Balkan 6 in terms of the economy in order to promote growth there. It's already estimated that full integration of the region would add 10% to the GDP of those countries concerned. But it's designed in such a way that no country, none of the Western Balkans countries, could hold back another one. So the first element, access to parts of the single market, promoting regional growth. The third are reforms to ensure a level playing field when you do have access to parts of the single market. That includes regulatory convergence, but it also includes fundamental issues like the rule of law and the independence of the judiciary. And last of all, in response to real reforms, investments, very significant investments, and there is a proposal of 6 billion euros consisting of 2 billion grants, 4 billion in favourable loans for the period up to 2027 for the Western Balkans. Now, we'll be working in the EU and with partners to make this a reality, and we hope very much that it will be a reality even in the first part of next year. Ladies and gentlemen, the enlargement package this year provides a guide both to the reforms that this country needs urgently to implement in the interests of citizens and its European path, as well as a huge incentive to improve economic and social conditions here in North Macedonia rapidly. This, I believe, is a powerful offer, but it's up to you to seize the opportunity. It is up to you to make it a reality through reform. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. After the ambassador's address, now I would like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister in charge of European Affairs, Mr. Marichikj, to take the floor. Thank you. Distinguished Ambassador Geer, distinguished representatives of the media, I would like to first congratulate the President of the European Commission, von der Leyen, and Ambassador Geer and Commissioner Varhey for their professional engagement and commitment to the process of preparing the growth plan as instruments that should stimulate us to do more, to work more, and to achieve more. Yesterday, we had the enlargement package for this 2023, when, unlike the last year, despite the strategy, the enlargement strategy, and the individual report for each candidate countries, with a detailed overview of overall readiness and progress, this includes another important document, as was mentioned by the ambassador, the growth plan for the Western Balkans, thus introducing a new additional dynamics in the process of integration. We strongly welcome the published growth plan of the economies of the Western Balkans, and for the first time, we have reserved money related to the reforms. 6 billion euros for the whole region, of which 1 billion euros can be available for North Macedonia. The growth plan will strengthen both the regional economy and thus the differences with the economies of the EU member states will be reduced faster. The growth plan enables access to the European common market. This means that our products and services will start to be marketed in the single European market under the same conditions with the EU member states, even before our official EU membership. The growth plan is a result of our requests and efforts. For some time, as a country candidate, we have been asking the EU and the other candidate countries in the region to be able to use the opportunities and privileges of joining the EU ahead of time. That is, while the negotiations are ongoing. You remember that this was the topic of faster integration or more integration before membership for some time now. Our ultimate goal, both of the EU and North Macedonia, is to make the first transfer of money to North Macedonia and to other countries in the Western Balkan regions by March 2024. This means that if we continue and if we accelerate the reforms and the integration process, we'll have the first transfer from the new package in 5 months from now. The growth plan is a financial and political investment of the EU in North Macedonia and our region, of course. The EU expressed a clear view that it needs and wants to see our country in the European family. The growth plan is a plan for the accelerated integration of the Western Balkans into the EU and the helping hand to speed up the membership process by 2030. More money means faster and more effective reforms. It is an obligation for more effective reforms. When it comes to North Macedonia, an extremely important message from the enlargement package and the findings in the report is that we must not allow ourselves to postpone the deadlines that are clearly defined. Despite the opposition's obstructions noted in the report, North Macedonia continues to meet the conditions for resuming membership negotiations. The country continues its efforts for EU reforms and works daily to meet European standards, which is also noted in parts of this latest report. Of course, we accept the indications in the report and consider them an important indicator of what is going on and what we should actually do. But postponing or putting in suspense the negotiations and the membership of North Macedonia in the EU also puts in suspense the reform process, according to the EU standards. In extremely complex geopolitical circumstances and regional tensions, and with the internal uncertainty surrounding the continuation of this European integration process, the acceptance of the constitutional amendments remains a prerequisite that we cannot avoid or skip. And there are no doubts that the decision is in our hands. Every next step in the process and dynamics of the negotiations will depend only on us. It is a false story, a myth, but also an irresponsible and dangerous political position that North Macedonia has the luxury of waiting or that it can reach a better agreement in the future. What is particularly important is the Commission's finding that the screening process is going smoothly, successfully, and the country and the government are showing a high level of commitment. I'm confident that with national consensus and maximum investment of the government as the bearer of the negotiations, but also of the whole administration, civil society, and all other stakeholders, we will fulfill the commitment to be ready for full membership by 2030. I would now like to turn to the report. The Commission, as always, this time provides an objective cross-section of the situation and progress in reforms, but it also identifies the areas where we need to increase our efforts and to deliver more results. The following important message emerges from that cross-section. We have progress in 81% of the chapters, and there is no setback in any chapter. 0 setbacks. Regarding the readiness of the chapters, we have an appropriate level of readiness in most of the chapters. The country's overall preparedness rating for 2023 is good level of preparedness and has been solid and constant over the years. In the section of the fundamentals, the European Commission stated that North Macedonia continued its efforts to strengthen democracy and showed its commitment to deliver results. Being the Deputy Prime Minister in charge of European affairs and Chief Negotiator, I emphasize the Commission's conclusion, which we also share, that the government and the administration mobilized significant resources and actively participated in the screening process. The screening process also provides the basis for defining future reform priorities from the EU agenda, which should be implemented and which inevitably require a broad public consensus. In this direction, we are working on the preparation of the roadmaps for the rule of law, reforms in administration, and the functioning of democratic institutions. I would like to say that yesterday, after the publication of the report, the committee officially adopted the letter with the request for delivery of roadmaps, because this is our obligation arising from the negotiation framework. This means that in the next few days, we'll promptly need to act with the formats and the drafts to consult the civil society and the political parties in the Assembly so that we can complete and send these roadmaps to Brussels. This is a good occasion to show that we are mature, to show our consensus regarding this issue. We'll have the opportunity next week when on next Thursday we have scheduled the session of the National Council on Euro Integration and the Commission on European Affairs so that we can discuss the findings of the report. I would like to appeal, and I plan on sending a letter today to the presidents of the National Council and the Commission on European Affairs to add this on the agenda, to add a discussion also regarding the roadmaps. The report is a reflection of our daily struggle for improvement of the society. It notes topics that are familiar to the citizens and especially familiar to us as the government. Everything that is stated in the report on our country is well known, and we are working hard on achieving solutions. An example of defiant actions detected by us and that we are working on them to find appropriate solutions is the work of the Judicial Council. We saw this problem and we asked as a government for the European Commission to send the Commission. We are now waiting for the findings and recommendations, and it remains for each appropriate institution within the framework of its jurisdiction in the judiciary to implement them. I can promise you on behalf of the government that we'll do anything in our power to implement these recommendations in the Judicial Council. Regarding the functionality of the democratic institutions, the EC maintains that it is necessary to have a constructive and inclusive political dialogue in the Assembly, especially for the reforms related to the EU. It is pointed out that there is need to adopt the constitutional changes, as well as the obligations of the Jean Monnet dialogue, which is very important for deblocking of the work of the Assembly. VMRO, DPM and the opposition are being asked not to hinder the country's progress. This has been demanded by us for a long time. The citizens insist on it, and now the EU itself. The government coalition have been and remain open to dialogue with VMRO, DPM and to joint consultations where the strategic interests of the country, such as the EU membership, are at stake. In that regard, I would like to propose to show next week that we can talk and define clear shared position on the most important matters related to our strategic interests. The experience of the EU member states says it is best to defend the interests if we are inside, in the EU. That's why it is high time for a consensus. All the political parties should show that they are in favor of European Union and membership. In relation to civil society, the report emphasizes that the civil organizations function in favorable environment. However, there is room for improvement of the legal and institutional framework and their active inclusion in the policy-making and decision-making processes, especially in the context of the EU integration process. In relation to basic human rights, the European Commission still assesses that the legal framework is generally in line with the EU standards. However, there are challenges in the reinforcement of the capacities of the independent bodies, such as the Ombudsman, the Commission for Protection and Prevention of Discrimination, improving the rights of persons with special needs, and especially improving the conditions in prisons and detention centers. In the case of freedom of expression and media, the Commission notes that it allows for critical reporting and critical media reporting, and with the amendments in the criminal code and the new law on civil liability and defamation, the legal protection of journalists was increased. We are aware that there remains a challenge for solving cases of attacks and threats against journalists, hate speech, improving transparency in relation to media, advertising by state institutions and political parties, and of course the reforms in the public broadcasting service. In the case of justice, security, and freedom, there is a statement that the country continues to play an active role in managing mixed migration flows, given that it is on the map of migration movements. The ratification of the status agreement with Frontex made it possible to start with joint activities and the engagement of police officers from EU member states who assist in managing borders and tackling cross-border crime. Regarding the economic criteria, there is a good level of preparedness in the development of the functional market economy. Although in 2022, the economy was severely affected by the consequences of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, North Macedonia still managed to ensure financial and macroeconomic stability. In times of crisis, the government supports households and businesses through enormous energy subsidies, tax reductions, and targeted direct income support. Dear citizens, in the end, I would only like to point out that the recommendations contained in this report, like every year, will be used as a basis for the implementation of the reforms in the period to come. The plan and the process of EU integration in general is not only for the activities of the government, but for the country. And that is why we opened the door for participation of all who are part of the process, both from the government and the assembly, but also those who are outside the government and the assembly. We are fully aware that next year is an election year. Parliamentary and presidential elections will take place in the country, but also in the European Union. Elections for a new European Parliament and the completely new governing structure of the European Union, the European Commission, and all other institutions. That is why I would like to join the ambassador's appeal and all the officials from the EU that now it is the time for us to seize the offered chance and to approach the open door, to be part of the family of the European unification, solidarity, and economic progress, to make use of the available and offered EU funds for reforms according to European standards. Let us not allow new isolation and the affirmation of the Macedonian identity and the Macedonian language should not be confirmed in isolation, but in community with the other nations in the EU. The future is in the EU, not in isolation. This is our permanent determination. All political entities are called to take responsibility, to show ourselves worthy of the challenge in order to take the next step to EU integration. All these reforms at the table, but also the constitutional changes, are an investment for our future without losing anything and gaining everything. So let's score in our favor. Allow me, in the very end, to congratulate Ambassador Geer for the recommendation to start the accession negotiations for Ukraine and Moldova. This is an enormous step forward for the enlargement process. And we consider this to be a strong incentive for the countries of our region to accelerate the reforms and make connections to this new dynamic. Ambassador, thank you for the support and cooperation we have with you personally and with the delegation of the EU to North Macedonia. I reaffirm that we will implement all future reforms in partnership and in close cooperation with the representatives of both the EC and the member states of the Union, and with all our Euro-Atlantic strategic partners. Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Dear members of the media, now we will go with the questions from the journalists. 3 plus 3, 3 for the Deputy Prime Minister and 3 for Ambassador Geer. First, we'll hear a question for the Deputy Prime Minister, Marichikj. First for the Deputy Prime Minister, yes. Deputy Prime Minister, you had a quite good speech, but what the report notes in reality, what we read yesterday in the media and in the report itself, part of what the ambassador said was not mentioned. Can you tell us who misuses the EU flag in the laws in the Assembly? Who is responsible for the reforms in the judiciary, which, according to the report, there is no progress, there is even setback, and who is responsible for the setbacks and for preventing the fight against corruption? This is what is noted in the report. Until we reach real progress in these 3 pillars in the society, can we really start negotiations with the EU? Do we need only good packaging of the officials' speeches, or do we need work? Because we always see fault with others. But can you speak about the government and what you do? Thank you for the question. First of all, I think that we should be precise when using quotes from the report. I would like all of you to read the report and to see and to find the word setback. No, this is your free interpretation. If we quote the report, there is no setback in the report. Regarding the responsibility about the judiciary reforms and fight against corruption and the EU flag, I would like to briefly reflect on these matters. You said when we will start negotiations. We started negotiations on July 19th. We were present on the opening of the negotiations, so on the intergovernmental conference that took place in Brussels. The negotiations are ongoing for a year, and we expect completion of the screening in December. Based on this screening, we have report on the first cluster, fundamentals, and we expect a report on all other clusters. Through this screening process, all these weaknesses noted in the report have already been discussed with the European Commission, and they will be placed in these instruments and roadmaps that will serve us to remove the weaknesses in the process of negotiations. The question whether we will start or not negotiations is a false dilemma. We started negotiations. The question is whether we will continue. This continuation is not related to the report. It is related to the constitutional changes. The weaknesses of this report should be placed in our list of tasks during the negotiations, and whether we'll enter the next phase, it depends only on the constitutional amendments. We'll have the official letter that will invite us to submit the roadmaps. The roadmaps are a condition for opening of the first cluster. We'll deliver them, and we'll enter the next phase of opening of the cluster, but it will depend on the constitutional amendments. During the negotiations, all these topics, we've never avoided these problems, even before the report and now and after the report. We must work on these topics. That is why we invited the European Commission to deliver information on the Judicial Council. That is why we are fighting for bolder steps regarding the judiciary. I've been in Brussels with requests on several occasions to set vetting mechanism that has been proposed from 2017. We need responsibility in the fight against corruption, the credibility, the integrity of the judiciary, and the responsibility belongs to those institutions that are part of the judiciary. All courts, the Anti-Corruption Commission, will have an election of a new Anti-Corruption Commission. It will be very important how this institution will function, and we'll be ready, as we've been so far, and even more because we are aware of the problems, to overcome them with decisive and shared action of all political factors. Regarding the EU flag, you know, the EU flag has always been used at the proposal of the government and has been used when there are conditions for this, and of course when there is base for this. Regarding the criminal code, what was sent last, there are several directives that are being implemented, and there are articles in the law where the directives are not implemented, but most of the articles implement certain directives. Always, when we proposed the use of the EU flag, there was a base for this. But I believe that we adopt the new rules of procedure that are in procedure in the Assembly, and Levica has thousands of amendments on this matter. If we adopt the rules of procedure, then we can even not use the EU flag, because these rules of procedure removes a significant instrument, as it is proposed now, that has been used by the opposition for killing the essence of the Assembly, and that is that each member of the Parliament can block certain law. By removing this possibility and by normalizing the conditions for work in the Assembly, we will not have the need, and the EU flag will be used in rare situations when there is an enormous European standards that should be implemented. And that is why I believe that the essence of the question regarding the EU flag is an essential question for the functionality of the Assembly. I sincerely hope that we'll have the new rules of procedure adopted, because this is good for the country. No matter the political stage, it is good for the country to have it. The idea of the EU flag is to reaffirm the consensus on the European Union. I can tell you that there are laws that were proposed in mid-2021 with EU flag, legitimately used EU flag, and they're still not adopted because there have been interventions, endless interventions. For example, the law on the Academy of Judges and Public Prosecutors and other laws that have been negotiated for 6 months with the European Commission so that we can use the EU flag. So we are aware of the problems. We're not avoiding them. We're not running from them. But these problems, these challenges cannot be an excuse for avoiding the key responsibility, and that is adoption of the constitutional amendments. Because we remember that in the past we've had better and worse reports, but even when we had better reports, we could not enter the next phase without resolving the essential matters. I'm convinced, and I assure you, that there is no problem noted in this report that we cannot resolve during the negotiations with the EU. Each of these problems can find its place in the roadmaps and in all other parts of the negotiations so that it can be resolved. But we need to have the opportunity for this, and to have this opportunity, it is important to do our work regarding the constitutional amendments. Now we'll continue with questions for Ambassador Geer, but can you be a bit more specific? Ambassador, brief one. After this report, what is your view? Will North Macedonia be able to continue the steps towards EU integration only by resolving the problem with the constitutional amendments, or it will need to advance the 3 important pillars: the misuse of the EU flag, the fight against corruption, and reforms in judiciary? What is your message on this? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. I think the answer to the question is, first of all, as regards reforms, the only path to the European Union is a path of reform. That means comprehensive reforms as set out in this report and as set out in the screening report. Why? First of all, because if you want to enjoy the benefits of membership of the European Union, you need to be sufficiently resilient and prepared to ensure that you can really enjoy them. And for the European Union, we need to be certain that you come in as a partner which is solid, robust, and resilient. And that's why we're investing so much in reforms and will continue to do so. So reforms are absolutely essential. For the accession process itself, concerning the constitutional changes, it is clear the agreement is that we have already opened accession negotiations. The screening has gone well. The request for roadmaps is out there. The next step, in other words, identifying, moving up to the negotiations on the first cluster, depends on change to the Constitution. So both of these are important elements. In the long term, reforms are absolutely critical, also in the interests of citizens.
Now we'll have a question for the Deputy Prime Minister. Is there a question for the Deputy Prime Minister? Yes? The question is similar to the colleague. The report was evident there is no self-criticism. Now we noted in your speech that there is certain self-criticism, but in the first statements of the Minister of Foreign Affairs and your partners, the opposition was attacked. Can the opposition be always attacked on these weaknesses? You say that there is no setback. You have been in power for almost 8 years. What is the question? The question is again, who is the main culprit? if I need to point out the main culprit, then I think that we can locate them in the political structure that continuously blocks its own country for years now. There is no dilemma in that. Otherwise, many laws would have been adopted, many things would have been done if we did not have this blocking in the assembly. And we face it all the time. You know about the adoption of the Prespa Agreement, the constitutional amendments. We've always faced serious blockages. Do you want me to remind you that the loans that the country should have taken in order to function, and grants, and even in municipalities, we've always been facing blockages. Part of the projects were stuck due to their political decision that they will not implement certain European projects. The public is aware of this. It does not mean that we as a government do not have any weaknesses, or that the other institutions that work in judiciary do not have their own weaknesses. But that is why I say this is a good occasion, with the creation of the roadmaps, with the creation of the action documents, to see what the priorities are. We have certain image from the reports and the screening reports. And this is a good occasion to show that we will never block these matters, that each party will give its contribution, and to find solutions on many matters. I see that today, I think it is today, an election of director of OTA, an institution whose director is elected with 2/3 majority. We'll have a period of election of State Commission for Prevention of Corruption, that it requires consensual expression. We'll have the occasion. I do not see why the completion of the Constitutional Court is being blocked. There is no reason for this. And many other things. We'll have the opportunity to show how and whether we can move together. I know that we want to have culprits on certain matters, but the complexity of these matters, especially the rule of law, these are matters that require political action from all political parties, but they also require institutional action from competent institutions. The government cannot and should not resolve the problems of the Judicial Council, just as the Judicial Council cannot resolve the problems of the government. It is not an obligation of the government to resolve the problems in any court of the country. On the contrary, the courts should resolve their problems on their own, and the government should provide a framework for their action. I think that this report is a good occasion to look at the problems, to see them in the eyes, and without any political burden, to move forward, because we are a country that negotiates on membership. We are not a candidate country. We are not in a phase when we are waiting to start negotiations. We are deeply in the process, and the screening reports are so comprehensive. There is no space to improvise and to present something as better or worse. There is progress in certain areas, and we should use this dynamic. We should use this momentum, because at times we've shown that we can do this. And by the next report, we should try to have better grades. I'm sure that this can happen only if all of us are committed to the task. But if we lie to ourselves that we will do the reforms and it is not important whether we will make the constitutional amendments, then we've seen that it is not like that. And on the contrary, and if we think that the constitutional amendments can be done, but reforms can wait, then this is not a decision. The decisions and the recommendations in the negotiation framework are clear. If we want to continue with the negotiations, we will need to adopt the constitutional amendments. Thank you. I'm convinced that there is no better framework than the negotiations with the EU for resolving these matters. I'm not saying that this is a magical wand, but we have put the problems on the table. We have identified the weaknesses. We have identified plans on tackling the matters. This was, in fact, the objective of the screening. We should just put it in action. Thank you. Do you have any other questions for Ambassador Gear? I would like to hear an answer on yesterday's decision on Ukraine. I know that the Deputy Prime Minister congratulated, but the disappointment in the Western Balkan countries is enormous due to the fast decision on Ukraine, especially in times of war. Even recently, Edi Rama gave a statement when he said that he asked whether maybe the Western Balkans should enter mutual military conflicts so that we can have faster integration. Is he right?
I would first of all invite you to read the report on Ukraine. And what you'll see there, the Commission, in an objective way, looks at the different conditions that were set down for reform and shows the ways in which Ukraine, separately Moldova, has fulfilled many of those conditions in very difficult circumstances. And so the Commission carried out, I think, an objective assessment, and on that basis has made a recommendation that Ukraine and Moldova should move forward. That's to be welcomed. That's part of the merit-based process. Now we have to focus here. First of all, the important thing is to see the reforms happening. I don't want to see no progress in a report. I want to see good progress in these crucial areas. That's where the emphasis has to be done. And this report judges how this country has done in the course of the past year in reforms. Of course, you have a track record of reforms, which you can build on. You are well advanced compared to Ukraine. Ukraine is beginning this process. But nonetheless, I think these are separate objective reports looking at performance. And at the same time, the European Commission has said, okay, this is a historic decision for Ukraine and Moldova. But we also know that we need to get the Western Balkans into the European Union. We want you in. So what we've done is we've put on the table this growth plan, which is a really, as I've said, a significant new step to ensure that through economic and social convergence, you start to get the benefits of membership already, and you can advance more rapidly to the European Union. But the rest is your homework, it's your decision, it's for you to take. And if you take those decisions, working together, then you will join the European Union.
Я би сакал да искоментирам нешто на ова што ако
Just a brief comment on this. First of all, I think that we do not have a single reason to be disappointed with the opening of the negotiation process on Ukraine and Moldova, because we cannot build our happiness or our future hoping that someone else will not get the opportunity. On the contrary, I think that in geopolitical and geostrategic situation of Europe currently, the opening of the negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova should be seen as a chance, as an opportunity to look into the promise of the European Union for membership of the Western Balkan countries and to remind the European Union of this promise. And this is what we're doing. I think that the opening of the negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova will create additional pressure over the Union so that it does not allow forgetting of the Western Balkans. This would be a geostrategic mistake of the European Union if they forget the Western Balkan in the following enlargement package whenever this happens, and we think that it is possible to have it by 2030. So I believe that together with Ukraine and Moldova, which recently were not planned for enlargement, and now there obviously are, we should exert additional pressure for the next enlargement to include the Western Balkan countries. Everything else will mean leaving the Western Balkans in a place of instability, and that is why I believe that the European Union understands this, And we are obliged to remind them of this. But also I would like to mention that what is very important in this new dynamics of enlargement and the new dynamic of all opportunities, or let's say opening of opportunities for faster integration, but even when talking seriously about the process of enlargement for new members, the European Union should not forget to discuss the issues in which way the bilateral matters between EU member states and candidate countries burden and damage the credibility of the negotiation process. This is something that North Macedonia has learned in the more difficult way. We felt this in very difficult form. We felt the consequences when the negotiation process will be stuck by bilateral issues with certain member states. That is why we believe that if we speak about reforms, which are inevitable, we should set a system of merits when the countries that are good in reforms will advance without being hindered by a single member state or a single bilateral issue that is not part of the negotiations with the EU. Thank you.
The presence of the President of the European Commission here and across the Western Balkans last week, I think, demonstrates once more that Europe certainly is not going to forget the Western Balkans. We see you as an essential part of the accession process, and that's why we're so engaged. And then just a small technical issue for all of your viewers and readers, just to remember this is a recommendation, an historic recommendation by the European Commission to open accession negotiations. People refer to opening, but it's a recommendation to open.
Благодарам. Thank you. Доколку немаме дополнителни прашања.
If there are no any other questions, I would like to thank for your attention and interest and for being here, and I will officially conclude the press conference. Thank you.
Thank you.